I'd like to introduce Brian Solis of Altimeter Group, who will be our first executive speaker for the day.
Thank you for having me here. It's actually quite an intimidating opportunity because there's a lot of people in this room that I admire. I'm here to share with you sort of my thoughts, and it's more of an exploration, really, than it is a presentation on exact findings. The reason why it's more of an exploration is because, as Jeff just said, we live in a really interesting time. And these are times that are either going to be defined for us or defined by us. And I choose the latter. Thank you very much. I think I grew up in a time where I was either a misfit or someone who just really wanted to see change happen, because I always found myself questioning everything. Why do we have to do things this way? Why does it have to be done that way just because it's always been done that way? Nothing screams innovation, though, like PowerPoint. So I hope you'll indulge me while we run through some slides here. But really, well, actually, nothing screams innovation like a remote that doesn't work. So we're gonna go old school. I live in a world where I work with executives, I work with startups, I work with investors, and the one thing that's fascinating is that everybody talks about change. It's just nobody leads it. Everybody's expecting someone else to bring about change. And the number one reason that I hear that change isn't ushered in more quickly is that there's just a lack of urgency. So my job is to be part lawyer, to go gather evidence, to make the case, and also part politician, to be able to bring people together who don't talk to one another and who don't want to talk to one another. I host dinners with CIOs and CMOs and CEOs quite often where I will hear from said parties that they will not sit at the same table with the other person, which is just a little ridiculous. So the point that I want to make today is when we explore platform strategies or even ecosystem strategies, it's really not because, well, I'm sure there's business value there, but it's not just because of the business value. Really, it's about defining a future that actually meets with the needs of a society that is different than us. And I always find it a little odd that many of us would come from generations where we actually had to get up and change the channel on a television with a knob. And here we are, the architects of the future, where a lot of the things that kids are doing today is so counterintuitive to our thinking that why are we the architects? And so this is the way, if anybody here is geeky like I am, you'll recognize this as the panel from the DeLorean and Back to the Future. And if you look at the future, it's next year, right? And to a lot of visionaries behind this trilogy, that is what the future was supposed to look like. And I don't know about you, but it kind of looks to me like an album cover for a punk band, not as much as the future. And so my point of all of this is that we live in a society that's changing, as Jeff pointed out, and I think what we have to do is better understand the human reasons why it's changing so that we could design for it in a much more meaningful way. And really what that comes down to, and the value of platforms, is not just looking at a product or service to sell or to grow or to scale, or not just look at these technologies and innovations as opportunities to increase operational efficiency and scale and margins. This is really about looking at technology and platforms as a solution for bringing human beings together in different ways that require architecture. So as we saw here in Jeff's commentary, we live in a society where people don't want to even own a home. They don't need to. I mean, partly because it's so astronomically expensive, but it's just not how people define the American dream anymore. It's not what you and I grew up with understanding. At the same time, people are cutting services that we depend on. A lot of people don't even own televisions anymore, and some of us will have 4 or 5 in our home. You have a time where the idea of television isn't what you and I would define it as. Some people are very happy just watching YouTube videos or videos in general on a smartphone. That's their television. So understanding all of these crazy things, understanding that people in the sharing economy or the collaborative economy or the peer-to-peer economy, none of this is slowing down, right? So when you understand why these things are happening, it's not just because the platforms exist that bring people together. That's technology. There are socioeconomic factors that inspire me, that help me better understand from a human perspective the fact that things have to change and someone's going to have to lead that change. If you saw the recent Gallup poll that said that 13% of workers feel engaged by their job and that most people were disengaged from their job, I don't know that that was really as surprising as it was finally being able to have a stark number next to it to create a sense of urgency. I was with Jeff Winter, who is the CEO of LinkedIn, and he talks a lot about this idea of an economic graph. And he had stated something that just slapped me in the face and woke me up, and it was this idea that LinkedIn has a lot of data. They have data that shows companies in terms of who they're hiring for, what they're hiring for, and they have a list of expertise, right? Everybody who has a profile on there lists what they're really good at. And they've noticed over the years this increasing gap between jobs that companies are hiring for and the expertise that exists in society. So that is one place where we have to start to close the gap, and that's realizing that what we value is not necessarily what everybody else is valuing. So I like to play on Clay Christensen's words, where he talks about the innovator's dilemma. And I see this as an opportunity for us to build platforms and ecosystems that solve problems. There are plenty of problems when you really start to look at it. And those problems could also be defined as opportunities. Again, I don't know that it's being a misfit or just simply trying to figure out better, more efficient, or different ways to do things. And that's what I feel this opportunity really is about. It's about challenging ourselves to see things through the eyes of someone else, to better understand through empathy why things are the way they are in order to design something new. So, not to tease Dave, but Dave said that they were going to be videotaping this, and you think about that, right? It's ingrained in us, the world the way it was, and the way that we need to see the world moving forward, because my son is 17, he's never really seen one of these things. And I have some, just for posterity's sake. They keep my coffee from ruining my tabletop. This is a TV listing from the 1970s. And many of us sort of recognize that, and it's fascinating to me just how little innovation there has been in everything that we do every day. It's almost become iterative rather than innovative. And I guess that's really what I want to explore with you today, is what happens when we see the world differently? What happens when we stop looking at the things that we use every day and start to question it? Why does it exist this way? Because I'm part of that culture that recognizes the beauty of a remote control saving me from having to burn unnecessary calories getting up and changing the channel. But it also is a reflection of just how little we tend to look at opportunities to innovate. This is the evolution of the remote control. As you can see, it's just gotten a little ridiculous over the years. But you can see its history and design. Not everybody in this room uses a phone to control their television. It's a much better experience, I can assure you. But if any of you own an iPhone, you realize how quickly your battery dies. This was a headline that I saw that really fascinated me. And this also just sort of a greater reflection of what we're talking about. I live in Silicon Valley. I have to hear startup pitch after startup pitch, and I feel fortunate to do that, but I also feel like most of these companies that I meet with don't necessarily understand the difference between creativity, innovation, and disruption. A lot of copying, a lot of iteration. This I thought was funny. I pulled this off the web last night. Everybody wants to be the Airbnb of. And you get to see all of the new companies launching. You could do this with any company. The Uber of. Whatever. Then you have debates. I'm sure many of you followed this. I know that John Hagel in the room, you wrote a very brilliant piece in response to this debate. Carlos, tell him I'll call him back, please. The point of that debate and the point of the Airbnb of is completely missing this greater opportunity. Innovation is happening. Disruption is happening. I would rather not get into the particulars about the cases of what is disruption and what isn't, and just accept the fact that we either are going to disrupt industries or we're going to be disrupted. Because when you look at technology, for example, I track a lot of emerging tech. You have real-time social and mobile sort of at this core of things that are happening. But then you have all kinds of different things, like ephemeral and geo and gamification, the idea that the phone is the second screen or the first screen, and you have this whole new ecosystem that's launching around that. You have big data, you have beacons, you have the maker economy, you have the sharing economy, you have the Internet of Things, you have virtual. My point is, there's a lot happening. And a lot of it is happening to us, not necessarily happening because of us. So innovation and disruption is not going to slow down. It's only going to accelerate. Many of you here represent businesses. Some of you obviously represent the academia. I believe that our opportunities are to better understand not just the fact that these technologies exist, it's how do we use them in ways that people can use. I guess another way to say it is, how do people use this to improve their life, to improve their work? That takes architecture, not just releasing products and technologies and iterations of those. That takes a vision that helps people better understand that not only do we need to question how things are, how do we use these technologies to change how things are? Because as an analyst, I work with business after business after business that purely invests in technology because they have to, not because they have a greater vision for how technology is going to improve something or how it's going to change something. And that lack of vision has to be filled by someone. If you wait for someone to tell you what that vision is, you're going to be waiting a long time. We have an opportunity, I think, to be that visionary, regardless of the role that we have with the organization. Because if we do not have vision, we're going to take something very new, potentially disruptive, and put it into a system or an infrastructure within an organization or within an ecosystem that is old, outdated, inefficient, frustrating at times, or all the time. And this is where the idea of platforms or ecosystems to me begin. What is the vision for what it is that you're trying to solve or what it is that you're trying to create? We could look at the Internet of Things just as one example. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of anxiously awaiting the iWatch. But that will be just the latest thing that I have that connects to the Internet. I also have a Nest. I also have I forgot what even they call it, the fire alarm that the Nest team made. Thank you. We have all of these things that are supposed to make dumb things smarter, smart things smarter. But again, without a greater vision, you have the remote control problem. This is 2014, a year before we go back to the future, and we still have 20 remote controls in our living room. And we already have that problem with the Internet of Things. You have an app to control all of these things because there wasn't someone who saw a greater vision of what's possible. We are starting to see that with Google's acquisition of Nest. I personally am both frightened and optimistic. But just in your home, the Nest is supposed to be your hub, right? And that is supposed to help you control from a central point your house, the Internet of Things that you distribute in your house. And I guess that's what inspires me, is this opportunity to think differently about all of this technology that's going to hit us. How do we make it work for us instead of reacting to it? To me, that's platform, that's community, that's ecosystem, that's people coming together from all sides, where businesses allow us to come together and do something we couldn't do before. Because I think that without centralization, without this design thinking around community and platform and ecosystem, I think we're going to get caught up in reacting to technology. I'm sure that some of you have seen this very interesting trend that's happening where a lot of individuals are going to digital detox centers. I don't know that I can get into an elevator without having to look at everyone in the as we go up the floors to just actually see why they're looking at their phone. Most of the time, there's no signal in there. And I'm starting to think that as a society, we're really getting caught up in just reacting and letting technology use us rather than us using technology. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of vision. I'll give you an example. When something goes wrong at Facebook, let's just say somebody violates the trust of a social contract because an app, for example, starts blasting out that you're using the app across the platform. That's not Facebook's fault, everyone. That's the developer's fault. And that comes from a lack of vision from Facebook being able to control their ecosystem or being able to inspire their ecosystem to think differently. And that's sort of a growth hack from the development community or the entrepreneurial community that sees that as a way to grow faster. My point is this, is that no one's going to tell you how to use this stuff and how to design something better. That has to come from you because you feel it, or you thought it, or you experience it. The one thing that I can definitely share with you is that ideas are a dime a dozen. I mean, Silicon Valley isn't the only place where technology is abundant. It's everywhere. I mean, my barista has great ideas for startups. But the idea, though, is what's the difference between a good idea and a great idea? Well, first, it starts with having that. But I want to share with you just some of the things that I've observed that's beautiful, but also different, right? Creativity, innovation, and disruption, they're all things that we need to explore, and I think we need to explore a little bit more actively. That starts with a culture of making that okay. And that means that not only is it okay to have ideas, but it's also okay to explore them. And more so, it requires a culture that rewards both risk and success. Because without it, we inexplicably deny it through our actions or words, or the absence of our actions and words. If we do not have a culture that supports it, then we don't have a culture that supports it. I can tell you that as an advisor and sometimes investor, it is really difficult to tell the difference between a good idea and a bad idea. They both sound equally ridiculous at the beginning. But that's the point. If we can't explore them, if we can't take ideas from today and be able to explore them as individuals or as part of a greater company, then what's the point? See, to me, creativity is when we use imagination or we have original ideas to create something, right? That's just creativity. A lot of ideas are really good in that regard. But innovation, this is fantastic. This is total PowerPoint in action where the font breaks. But innovation is something that breaks into society or a market, right? And we could say that in many ways, a lot of folks will say that Airbnb is disruptive. It's disrupting the hospitality industry. But I would argue that Airbnb might be a little bit more innovative because it's certainly not the first platform that has existed that has brought the rental market together with people willing to rent. But to me, the opportunity is that innovation is something that you just don't inherently have as part of your culture. And it's something that you have to invest in. It's something that I believe you have to build. Executives and employees, though, can develop that and master that. I've seen this happen quite a bit. But it has to be deep within the organization. It has to be because, not just because it's a way to compete, but it's a way that you want to compete. And I can tell you that in the organizations that have started to invest in a culture of innovation, it hasn't happened because someone at the top had a bad dream and said, you know, you remember that company Kodak or that company Blockbuster? Yeah, well, I guess that could happen to us at any moment, so we have to actually start to think about competing for the future right now. Maybe that happens every now and then. But most of the time it happens because someone like you goes to a conference like this, or reads a book, or has a conversation, and starts to fight for change in the organization. And that's really where I think we all need to play a role. I look at this quote from Leo Tolstoy that I like to share often. It said, everybody talks of change, but no one talks about changing him or herself. And that's where things begin, because disruption, whether you think it's an overused buzzword or not, is a very real term. It's not something you really set out to design for, but it's something that I think happens as a result of great innovation. So for example, if Airbnb is innovative, then Uber to me is disruptive. When you challenge the value of a medallion, of a taxi medallion, because of the platform that you introduced, it's not because suddenly folks were looking for an app that brought a black car to you where you're standing. And it's not really because you have said to someone else, you know, I had the most amazing taxi ride here today. It's because the experience of that ecosystem has run its course. Probably it's long run its course. So this means that innovation, whether it leads to disruption or not, starts with people, right? There's always a pain, there's always a challenge, there's always an opportunity, there's always a dilemma that requires a solution. And that's where architecture and vision come in. And then that's where platforms can come into play, or ecosystems, depending on how you see this. As a digital analyst, trust me, this is something that I almost feel like I have to justify, because my job is to study technology. But it wasn't until I really started to explore the worlds of sociology, anthropology, that I better understood why technology was what it was, right? Uber is a perfect example of that. When you start to look at the more human side of things, it becomes incredibly poetic. It also becomes incredibly philosophical. And when it becomes philosophical, you're thinking about it. You're feeling it, you're exploring it, and you're starting to master the opportunities for technology. Twitter is fascinating in this regard. I was doing a press interview the other day, and the reporters at the end of the conversation said, "Hey, thank you. You speak in fantastic sound bites. You made this interview really easy." And I thought about that for a moment. I said, well, that's probably not really a compliment. And if anything, it's actually a sign that I use Twitter too much, because I was speaking in bursts, and I have to stop doing that. So, or maybe I don't. But I guess what I really want to share with you today is, what if the platform wasn't technology? What if the platform was you? What if it was you? And think about that for a moment. You're the one who has to wear all of these Internet of Things devices or install them. You're the one who's tracking your steps. You're the one who essentially is the remote control for a lot of this stuff. You should be able to walk into your home, and your home knows you, and everything sets its course. If you design around you, it's a different type of platform. It's a different type of ecosystem than trying to design around the device. And this is what I think inspires true opportunity. When you look at how we grew up, how we've iterated based on how we grew up, using the remote control as an example, you start to see that we might actually be working against ourselves. I'll share an example with you with some of the time I have left, 10 minutes. I'm sure you've seen this video, a 1-year-old playing with an iPad. This was life-changing for me, this video. It's kind of ironic, too, because I was writing my book when I stumbled across this video, and the irony wasn't lost on me, because I was completely procrastinating, and YouTube was my fix at that moment. But I think it happened for a reason. This video, if you haven't seen it, it's a father who basically gives his daughter an iPad at 1, and she naturally, intuitively, is able to use it. So he thought it would be funny if he gave her a magazine. Doesn't work. Gives her the iPad back, and she's happy. And to me, that was a profound moment because it was inherent to her to swipe and pinch, right? Just like it would probably be inherent to her to walk up to this screen and do that, right? And so as remarkable and revolutionary as the remote control was for me, she would probably look at that and say, who in their right mind thought that putting 100 buttons on a brick was how you were going to control that piece of glass? Yet we've been okay with it all of these years. And that's my point. If we don't question everything, then our opportunity for innovation and true disruption is already stifled. And in the end, her father sort of in a profound way says, you know, the iPad to her is, or the magazine is an iPad that doesn't work, but that Steve Jobs had forever coded her OS. And that's really what this is about. It's about reprogramming us as individuals so that technology works as an extension of us and that it works together, not the opposite way.
Dad works at Google, so he should talk.
Which, by the way, Marshall can attest to this. We had a fantastic conversation about why Google can't win in social last night. So we Google Buzz, Google Wave, Google Plus, and it was because, well, anybody work for Google here? I guess to be continued. But the whole idea was that it was it's an opportunity for them, we'll just say. But it's images like this that sort of remind me of what we're designing for, right? This is a baby seat. They also come in toilet training devices that have iPad holders in them. Let that sit in there for a moment. Getting trained young. So it was that video that inspired me about thinking differently from the onset, right? It's almost like the design thinking movement. If you had a different way to approach something, if you could start over, what would it look like? And that really is what this opportunity is about. So I'll just kind of fly through here in the ending, maybe take some questions before we move on. But think about this idea of user interface design, user experience, and designing around people as a platform. It might sound esoteric or even abstract, but I think we get caught up in designing technology for the sake of technology. I know certainly many investors invest that way. And we sort of miss this bigger opportunity to create more meaningful experiences. And I think that is the core of the future of platform design, is if you can enable a much more meaningful experience than I think what exists today. And experience is deep. It's not only something you do, it's something you feel. And you know that you've designed exceptionally well when it's completely invisible, when you don't even think about it. That's what inspires me. That's what inspires my work. I hope that's what inspires you, because it is a radical way of just taking all of these philosophies, these principles, these methodologies that exist between human-centered design, activity-centered design, behavior-centered design, and not saying that any one of those disciplines rule. It's what if they work together around a greater vision of using a platform based on you and me, a human API, if you will, where we actually make everything work for us and around us. Something doesn't have to be broken. Something can just be better. And that, to me, is why we have to become the dilemma's innovator, because there are so many examples of somebody with a great idea that built an entire ecosystem around it. Flyknit as a way of making shoes, Flyknit as a way of making clothing, Flyknit as a platform fascinates me. An electric car that builds an entire ecosystem around it, an entire platform around it, giving away the patents to further build out an ecosystem completely counterintuitive to the way that you and I grew up and the way that you and I studied the world of business. And it's because someone has a vision for making something better, making the product and the technology work on behalf of a human being. And it changes everything. It upsets people. You have to get regulators involved quite often. But who cares? That's what this is about. I think that a lot of times we miss the bigger opportunity because we're so excited about how technology is being used in our personal and professional lives. Sometimes we're just completely flummoxed about how our kids use it. But in the end, there are two ways to think about how to influence behavior and how to build on top of a human API. And that is, one, to manipulate human behavior, or the other is to inspire it. So I'll leave you with that. I believe I'm out of time, but I will, before I wrap up, take some questions. And by the way, thanks for kind of letting me explore my thinking with you this morning here on a beautiful Boston day.
Thanks, Brian. We do have time for some questions. Susan will give you a microphone. And would the next three speakers please come up to the front?
So I'm really interested in your point about people as a platform. So I'm curious, who are some companies or products or brands or movements that really get people as a platform?
Well, I think, I wish more. That's probably a good answer. But I think one that really gets it for me is Tesla. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of that is about innovation, and a lot of that is about technology. But I see Elon Musk as a great visionary who thinks at a grander level that I will never be able to see at. But by default, whether it's intentional or not, the entire ecosystem that he's built is fantastic. And just think about the charging centers as one example. Sure, he's building an infrastructure to charge your car anywhere, but at the heart of that was to reduce anxiety, right? Anxiety, for those who haven't been following the story, a lot of people are afraid of driving an electric car because they might just run out of juice. I have certainly that anxiety with my iPhone, which is why I have to put a case on it that's essentially a battery. But to me, that was a human-centered design aspect because it dealt with an emotion, maybe not even a reality, because some of those cars can go 300 plus miles. That's one that inspired me. The Flynet platform was one that also inspired me. I wanted to share that with you because it wasn't just about manufacturing or creating a platform for that, but it was also using you as a person to not only have something new to wear, but also to reduce your carbon footprint by simply using the product, right? The whole design process was designed to reduce waste in the design of it. So things like that, where you look at people and the impact that they have in society. There's other things like the business models of Warby Parker or Tom's, not the products themselves, but the business model of them, where they look at, we have people who don't have eyeglasses, we don't have people that don't have shoes, we have people that don't have clean drinking water, and they build that into the business model. So a lot of that is human-centered design, but the idea of building upon a human API is something that, this is why I'm exploring it. I'm trying to really find true cases of that or inspire true cases of that. And by the way, if any of you have seen any interesting things based on a human API, my email address is brian@altimetergroup.com. I would love to hear from you on that. Okay.
In regards to the human-centered API, thank you. How does that relate to how we educate our students in colleges? The curriculum, how we interact with them, what we encourage?
Well, that's a million-dollar question. You know, I will. I'll tell you this. I'll share a personal story with you. A lot of this has to start with understanding the way that they see the world. You know, why are they in that room? What are they trying to do with what it is that you're teaching? This quick story that I'll share with you. I gave myself a challenge with my last book. I think it was my 6th book, and I said, you know, here's this opportunity. I'm telling everyone that we have to change our thinking, we have to get in front of technology, and here I was about to write a book that was just going to be yet another rectangle on the same paper, using the same font, and I gave myself a challenge. It was, if I had to reinvent a textbook for a high school student, knowing that they need to use print still, What would that look like? And so I had to go through about a year's worth of better understanding the psychology of a teenager, how they read, what they absorb, how they process text versus visualizations, and completely redesigned what was going to be my book. In fact, it delayed it by a whole year. And that was what led me into this whole idea of human-centered design around the human API, was taking a book or a teaching opportunity and redesigning my approach to it so that it would be more relevant for someone. And the book itself was radically different. It has a UI, it has a navigation system. You don't have to read it from left to right. I had to change how I write sentences, which I think was pretty interesting, which is probably why I talk in sound bites now. And it was a real success from the teenager perspective. Not that they were going to buy the book, but to watch them be able to go through it in the testing and usability studies was just the tip of the iceberg. But the short answer is that when you approach that question through the perspective of someone else that is not like you, same with the remote control, you come up with something completely new and completely different. And when I finish my next book, I am actually going to give all of that work back to academia to see if we can't redesign textbooks and teach people in a new, interesting, engaging way as well. So great question. Thank you very much for your time and attention.